So you're a writer, and you're trying to tell a story using the 12-step framework, the infamous Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and it's 12 steps in sequence, and you are trying to adapt all of these points into your story, like the hero leaves his familiar world, the hero encounters a mentor. How's it going? Well, I'm here to help you with that, understand it, and maybe explain why you probably don't even want to be using it in the first place and what it really is. Welcome to The Whistle. I'm your host, Jenny Whitfield, and we're here to discuss narrative framework and Vogler's influence from Hollywood on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So the idea behind the hero's journey came from a Hollywood studio executive who was trying to interpret Joseph Campbell's work to share with other studio executives. Not because he was a scholar of literature or narrative, but because he wanted to get noticed at work. And why does that matter? Why does that matter? It matters because that doesn't make him a scholar. He didn't devote his life to researching this idea. Okay? He drafted it up in the course of a week, a couple minutes, sort of. He drafted it up in the course of a week and then quickly wrote it down, and then sent it out. And this idea, this is so crazy. This idea has become so incredibly influential. Even scholars now copy it and sometimes don't even take the time to actually examine the difference between what Joseph Campbell actually said and how Vogler, this studio executive, tried to interpret it for film. And that's crazy because it's become so influential. So influential. You can't get a book published unless you follow this 14-step framework because everyone thinks it's the gospel. And it's not the gospel. It's not canon. We don't actually know for sure if Joseph Campbell was even right, that there even is an underlying framework or that it has any structure to it. And if it is correct, if he is right, which we don't know for sure, and that's not what Joseph Campbell was trying to say, that there was this one thing and he was right. We don't even know that, but that's actually not what he said. That's not even what he said. Joseph Campbell did not write a 12-step sequence. Let me say that again. The famous hero's journey with its 12-step journey that the hero has to take from beginning to end. Beginning with, we meet the hero in his familiar world, to, what is the last one? He returns with the elixir. He doesn't actually say that. That's actually false. That's not even something that Joseph Campbell said. So I just want to put this in perspective. Writers are out here struggling to take this 12-step structure, and no one's even questioning where it came from, and adapting it into their story as though it's the gospel. And we're not even sure if it's true. And that's actually not how it even goes. We're not even sure if Joseph Campbell had stumbled onto an underlying structure. And that's certainly not what he said. He didn't say there are 12 steps. He didn't say that. So where did this all start? So Christopher Vogler was a junior executive at Disney who was trying to get noticed at work. As one does. Fair. That's fair. So he was trying to get noticed at work, and he thought the way that he could do that was through developing some kind of original idea, or taking an original idea and linking it to himself as, I'm the holy interpreter of this idea, and this idea is really great. So first of all, he has to take Joseph Campbell's original work, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is about a 350-ish page book that's kind of hard to understand and interpret it. So it's a safe bet that most people haven't even read it. Probably safe because no one questioned it. So he was right. No one actually read it. And he says, this is the book. This is the story that was used in Star Wars, because he recognizes elements of it. And yes, that's true. That is true. George Lucas did read the book and he interpreted it into his own story, and he used these elements into Star Wars. And that's why every time that someone says this is the hero's journey and they link it to the Star Wars story of Luke Skywalker, it's because the most famous example of that, and the person to truly do this, was in fact George Lucas when he wrote Star Wars. So Christopher Vogler takes this idea and says, this is what made Star Wars so successful. Well, who wouldn't want to copy that? Who wouldn't want to copy that? Who can say no to the success of Star Wars? So he makes Joseph Campbell seem like really important, and his storytelling structure, Vogler makes it into the gospel, and then he says, I'm the interpreter. So you have this original text, which may or not be as important as we think, and then over here you have this memo that was written by a junior executive as an interpretation of, and the two versions are actually quite different, and very few of us even really understand that or even know that, and yet we're all forced to adhere to it. So this is crazy. Like, the more that I try to study this and understand it so I can use it as a writer, the more I'm like, this is crazy. This is crazy. Why are we even stuck in this box? Like, who was Joseph Campbell, and how do we even know he was right? And in fact, we don't know. We don't know. He was just one of many scholars who was writing about this idea. This was in 1950. There's been a lot of folklorists and mythology experts who have tried to understand things like fairy tales, storytelling. We've got Aristotle's Poetics. What makes a play? What made Shakespeare so great? Is there anything universal in it that we can interpret? What do we find that is ubiquitous across any story told, and how do these stories find a way of replicating themselves? And if there's like certain bones to it, what could we find? So this idea has been around for a while, and a lot of scholars have been doing it. So Joseph Campbell certainly isn't the first, he isn't the only. And it's not that he's wrong. His work has its place, he has his theory. It's very based in Freudian psychology, Carl Jung psychology, so the psychoanalyst, that's his take on it. And it's a valid theory. It has its criticisms, it has its positives, it has its negatives, and he's up there with many other folklorists and storytelling experts. It's a valid theory if you've taken the time to read it and understand it. And you don't have to follow it like a gospel, and yet somehow, when they're judging if a story is worth publishing or a story is worth being made into a movie, everyone is all up in a bunch about this 12-step framework because it's the hero's journey and we all have to follow it. Like, I don't get it. But like, think about this. If you're a studio executive and you have to like sign a check to say, okay, you can go ahead and make this movie. Here's $200 million. I guarantee it's going to be a success. Like, you would want a framework, right? Like, you would want some sort of guide to say, whoa, okay, I didn't say that this story was good. I have this gospel here that says there are 12 steps that every story has to take, because that's exactly how Christopher Vogler framed it. He said, there's 12 steps, and this is what you can use to judge if a story's working or why it's not working. So if you're a studio executive and you're signing the check and you're like, my job depends on this, yeah, I would want something to back it up with. So regardless of whether he's right or not, which I think if you wanted to criticize it, I think good luck convincing your publisher or your studio executive, oh no, that's actually not right. You're wrong about that. Good luck. Good luck. They're going to give you 3 seconds of their time before they move on and sign off. So good luck with that. And I think that is the problem we find ourselves in. And a lot of very smart people sign off on these stories and they're like, this is definitely going to be a big hit. And then they sign off on some box office bomb for hundreds of millions of dollars when they expected it to be so good, like the next Star Wars. So, what exactly is the hero's journey, and how could we do like a side-by-side comparison between what Vogler said and what Joseph Campbell actually said. So why don't we start there? We can't even compare 12 steps to 12 steps, which is what I originally intended to do. But they're so different. In fact, Joseph Campbell didn't have steps, and they didn't follow a sequence, and there wasn't 12 of them. So Vogler said there's 12 steps, and they go like this. The hero is introduced in his or her own ordinary world. The hero receives the call to adventure. Okay. The hero is reluctant at first, refusal of the call. This is a necessary step, it says. The hero is encouraged by the wise old man or woman, which we call meeting with the mentor. The hero passes the first threshold, and once that threshold is crossed, there's no going back. The hero encounters tests and helpers, tests allies, enemies. The hero reaches the innermost cave, approaching of the innermost cave. The hero endures a supreme ordeal. The hero seizes the sword or reward. The hero takes the rope back. The hero experiences a form of resurrection, and then he returns with the elixir. So those are the 12 steps, as written by Vogler. So what did Joseph Campbell actually say? Joseph Campbell has a circular 3 stages that he calls rites of passage, which are basically 3 acts. And so in the first act, he does mention the call to adventure, refusal of the call, but what's very interesting is that this is not a necessary step. That's actually the end of the story, because a lot of folk tales are very short, and then they just end there. That's it. That's the story. The hero refuses the call and doesn't move forward. That's it. Supernatural aid. So if he accepts the call, he will receive it. He crosses the first threshold, so that's there. And he may or may not experience the belly of the whale. And then he experiences the road of trials and victories of initiation. And in that he may experience the road of trials, the meeting with the goddess, the woman as temptress, atonement with the father, apotheosis, or the ultimate boon. He may or may not experience these things. He will not experience all of them together in one story. And then in the final rite of passage, the hero experiences a return and reintegration with society, a refusal of the return, world denied, magic flight, rescue from without, crossing of the return threshold, master of 2 worlds, and freedom to live, the nature of the ultimate boon. And this is sort of summarized in the keys, which is what Vogler used to make his memo. So the keys is this summary that comes at the end of Joseph Campbell's book, or kind of halfway, where he re-explains in a quick summary what he's been saying through his theory. So they're quite different. Joseph Campbell did not have a series of steps, 12 or otherwise. He has these different stages, and at each stage the hero may experience certain things, and these are just universal elements that tend to occur. And his examples are sometimes good and then sometimes not good. And throughout it all, the whole story really hinges on, I wouldn't say Carl Jung, and this is something else that Vogler says. He says that Joseph Campbell's theory is based on Carl Jung and his archetypes, and that archetypes are this universal thing that's in all stories. And I think that this memo has made Carl Jung's archetypes just as influential as the idea of an underlying story structure that even exists. What Joseph Campbell actually said is deeply based in Freudian psychoanalysis, and it takes his theory of development, which is not written for boys and girls, it's only written for boys, and it follows his stages of psychosexual development, which is very weird, because Freud was weird and controversial. And so when that is like baked into this theory, the theory itself also becomes kind of weird and controversial. But Freud and other psychoanalysts, they really like to dig into our subconscious and find the things that drive us and how they manifest. And that is an idea that's very present in this theory. And so I think that's one of the very valid contributions that it does make to storytelling, is that people do things and they act out of these subconscious volitions that are deeply embedded, and we don't always understand why, but we pursue them anyway. What I think is so interesting about this memo that was written by Vogler in the mid-80s, that made the hero's journey so famous, is that it wasn't even just his idea. That's what makes it so funny, that he actually, in order to get noticed, he recruited a friend who was another studio executive to help him spend a week watching a whole bunch of movies. And then they took Campbell's theory and then they kind of sanitized it in a way, and they repurposed it for film the way that they saw it. And they gave this like really simple memo that executives just love. And here's the funny part, is that as he describes it, he spent a week with his friend. He invited his friend to help him. And then at the end of the week, he writes it all down and faxes it all over Hollywood. And then the idea makes its way around and other people try to steal the idea. And he's like, no, I can prove I sent the original fax. So it's mine. It's my idea. But here's the funny part. Why did he have to recruit this friend in the first place that he like mentions years later when he talks about the memo? If he could have come up with this on his own, why did he have to call his friend? And then why didn't he accredit his friend in the beginning? Why did he say, this was my idea? Why did they spend, so just think about this. This is a story in itself. He spends a week with his friend. They take a week off together. They watch all these movies and they work out this theory. And then at the end of the week, Vogler writes it down, credits himself only, and faxes it. Like, how betrayed does that friend feel right now? Like, I helped this guy, probably couldn't come up with an idea on his own, and then he just takes credit for the whole thing. So how do you, as a writer, interpret this, and what do you do? So, to his credit, Vogler says there's no way to truly understand the text without reading the original. I agree. You can't just read this memo and think you even understand Campbell's theory. So I would say absolutely go find yourself a copy of Joseph Campbell's original book, published in 1949, 1950, and then read other books on the subject, right? Like, don't stop there. If you want to understand structure, don't stop there. Continue understanding Aristotle's Poetics, or the Epic Laws, or, which is a video I'm doing next. And I'm going to take all the credit. I'm going to make it a 7-page memo, and I'm going to take all the credit. No, I'm not, but I am going to summarize. I'm going to summarize it for you, and I'm going to encourage you to go read the original. And you can develop an understanding, so you can at least argue and defend why you should apply it and when, and what story structure means to you, and how many acts your story should have, and what is going to be the character development in your own story. And is this a rule? No, this is not a rule, so you're free to break it anytime you want. However, because the people you have to sell this to, like studio executives, like book editors, or agencies, I don't know, do you follow it? Do you follow it to get your work published so that you can say, actually, no, that's not right? I don't know. I don't have the answer. Because that's what it's like to be a writer. You have creative ideas, and then you try to sell them and market them and find out like how hard it is. There is no answer. People in Hollywood and editors seem to think that this memo is like the Grail, like the Holy Grail, and they're not going to take the time to read the original. And like, I'm not kidding when I say scholars haven't even read the original. Like, one of my English profs, true story, said the hero's journey has 12 steps, and she quotes everything from Vogler. And she says it's a reference to the original book written by Joseph Campbell. Clearly hasn't even read the original book, because that's not what's in there. And I really do think that part of why no one really understands it is because it is really hard to understand. And it would be so much easier to just take this memo and be like, oh yeah, I get it. Like, I get the summary of it. Because the original is hard to understand. It doesn't have a nice 12-step sequence. It's Freudian. It's all about the subconscious. So it's not easy to understand. And the hero doesn't take one step. And at times, Joseph Campbell contradicts himself. He says one thing, and then he says another. Let me give an example. At times, Campbell says the belly of the whale is this step that you take right after you cross the first threshold before you get into the adventure. And then later when he does his description of the keys, the belly of the whale is one of the potential things that can happen in the first act. So that's just one of the many ways that Joseph Campbell actually contradicts himself in his own work. So to truly understand it and say, I'm going to apply this structure to my work is not easy, because I don't feel when I read it that it's a really well thought out theory. Some theories are very sparse, very easy to understand. They use very short words. This one is very long, contradictory, and the ideas are not easy to apply, and they're certainly not easy to test or examine and determine, like, is this actually true? Is this actually true? Can we critique it? How do we analyze it as fact? How do we study its validity? I'm going to say, here is the framework. Here is the original idea. Here is the copied idea. This is how it differs. And when you're trying to understand structure, because it's not easy. It's not easy. And people like to talk about it as though it's so easy. And I think that that idea itself also goes back to Vogler, because that's one of his ideas in his memo that he comes up with, is he says, there are these 12 steps. And he himself is contradictory. He's like, there are these 12 steps. I figured them out. There's definitely 12 steps. And that's what Joseph Campbell says. So first he says that. Then he says, but if we follow it too rigidly, we'll end up with formulaic storytelling, which is bad, which I think has happened. I think his prediction was true. And he says, you can change it out anytime you want. You can just remove some, make some up. So is there a structure or is there not a structure? Is there a 12-step framework that I have to follow, or is there not? Like, pick a lane. Like, you have to pick a lane. Like, you can't say there's a structure and then say, but it doesn't matter. And I think that that idea has become just as pervasive as everything else that Vogler said. This is what Campbell said. He throws this idea in that there is one structure, but you can change it up. And I think that's this laissez-faire approach that we all have to structure. And I think that's what makes it so difficult to understand, because you have theorists who barely understand what they're talking about in the first place, saying, including academics, saying there's 12 steps in the hero's journey and all good stories follow it, and it's just embedded in our psyche. And then they say, but you can just change it however you want. So how are you as a writer supposed to know what to do and get your work published when the people judging your story as valid for publication are using this formula and thinking, oh, but you can just change it whenever you want? Like, I don't know what to do with that. So tell me what you think. Tell me what your experience is. Drop it in the comments below. And until then, happy writing. Happy writing. Don't rip your hair out. Get published. Write your story and keep going. I'm Jenny. This was The Whistle. And be sure to tune into our next video. Like and subscribe.